Now, we have a fantastic and rare opportunity to have Professor Kanter and both of the co-founders of ESMA, so Barry Mathews, and we'll also bring in Barry Murphy into the panel to answer some of your questions. And we also have a special guest, Mohammed, who is an alumni of Barry's charity, and Barry mentioned earlier. And congratulations, Mohammed, on your new role as well. So at this point, we're going to start the Q&A. Thank you all for the great questions so far on Slido. Just to note, we are moderating the questions behind the scenes to ensure every panelist gets a fair share of airtime. And you can still add them in there and you can still upvote. So just please keep the questions coming. And any that go unanswered, we'll follow up with the community to try and provide answers after the meeting. Okay, so Mara, please invite the, okay, we've invited Barry Murphy in now, and I can see Mohammed as well. Welcome to the panel. So first of all, we have a question from Charlotte Hillenbrand to you, Professor Kanter. And Charlotte's asking, what advice do you have for rapidly building a shared vision for cross-sector stakeholders to commit to?
Thank you very much. And by the way, thank you for this opportunity. I found the entire thing very path-breaking, and I hope to applaud your progress and hear about it. So I would say that's a great question, Charlotte. The word rapidly, though, may be a bit of a problem because it requires patient telling the story again and again and again. And like all great sales processes, you sell one-on-one rather than in groups. Often you don't convene a group until you're pretty clear where everybody stands. And so if it's inefficient to do it one by one, yet people like one-on-one. They like being heard and listened to, their organization's interests, their own interests. And so what the intrepid innovators that I write about, that I mentor, that I help do, is they keep at it. They keep visiting people. They visit them in their own settings, which may be difficult now, but we'll find a proxy for that. They learn about their interests. Torsten Thiel, the oceans guy, Tila, would often offer to help before he would ask. He would find out the agenda of the organizations he was talking to, and he would offer to help. And then he would gradually introduce his vision, his ideas. And so it's a process over time. It's not something that happens instantly. You can accelerate it, of course, if you write a lot and you are in essence crowdsourcing. That is, you're finding out who responds to what you put out there and write, and you have to find room for all of them. But for the core of your coalition, you need people who are truly dedicated and who have skills. I mean, these coalitions, I know there's another question about making this practical, a day-to-day operational reality. Practically, you need a core team that has the range of skills that are going to bring it forward. Often they're paid, not just volunteers, but sometimes they start out as volunteers. And then you have lots of groups in a circle around you. And you have to make sure that each one of those groups feel like they are benefiting. So the vision has to be a big enough umbrella that many people can stand under it, and that this umbrella helps them accomplish their goals while they join together to help you accomplish yours. I know I just packed a lot into that answer, but think about giving before getting. Think about helping many organizations accomplish their goal. Think about constantly enlarging the circles without diluting the focus. And finally, keep communicating to your allies and partners. One mistake people make in the middle is they spend all their time thinking about the opposition, the critics, and they stop communicating to the people that support them. You've got to communicate to your supporters all the time.
Fantastic. Thank you, Professor Kanter. The next question's targeted at Barry Mathews, so make sure you're unmuted, Barry. This is from Michelle Lord. She says, how do we get more organizations to embrace collaborative, ambitious, and radical approaches to thinking and acting together to challenge systemic inequalities?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. How do you get people to work together? Well, get rid of bloody ego. I absolutely hate ego, and I hate a desire to own a social issue. So nobody owns social mobility, and that's why I have a concern about a social mobility index, which ranks people in terms of who's doing best at when it comes to tackling the issues that hopefully we're going to identify and message out to a wider audience through the ESMA project. So I think the first step is to get everybody who wants to do something to accept that they don't have the silver bullet, and actually the only way in which one can create real change is to act in a collaborative manner and showcase that. So thankfully we've got a good example of that that's been working since 2017 in the charity. And SMBP isn't a large charity. It's 2.6 FTE. We had an operating budget of less than £250,000 a year, which is funded by 23 corporates, putting in between 5 and 15K. But what it is a facilitator, and the delivery is done by the various organizations working in collaboration. So I think in terms of cutting through the crap, as it were, sorry, I'm doing pretty well in my language today. It's about showcasing the reach and the scale you can achieve if you don't go ahead on your own and look to seek to get the plaudits of being the person who's done the most in this space. And by evidencing that through things like we're doing, and there's other organizations who've got the same attitude, but it's not a competition. When a child succeeds, that child's success is their own. We're one piece in the jigsaw. And I think actually, if Mohammed's on the call, it'd be really interesting for him to reflect on that, having just achieved all against all odds, what will be an amazing career. Super, super, super human being.
Fantastic. Well, Mohammed, do you want to comment on that quickly?
Well, firstly, thank you, Cain, and thank you, Barry. I really appreciate your kind words and for the amazing session. But actually, what Barry said, and effectively the impact of the SMBP on me, it's something which I've thought about a lot over the years. And actually, the answer I give has evolved and developed a lot, because often I'll have situations where I'll look back and realize that actually the reaction I had to something in a certain situation was often down to the impact of the SMBP. But ultimately, in essence, I believe that the impact SMBP had on me, it can effectively be concluded into two things. Firstly, access. The SMBP, it gave me an access into the corporate world, and not just entering offices, which of course I'll come back to later, but it's not something which it should be overlooked, but the smaller things which are often not considered. And so, for example, I come from a family where no one in my immediate or extended family has ever had to commute into work using the underground. It's always been in our banged up cars. So suddenly I needed to navigate the tube system and be amongst the commuters at the 9 a.m. rush hour and at 6, 7 p.m. 100% definitely overrated, but it was something I had to get used to. And then also just going into the office, which meant that I needed to go out, buy formal attire. And actually one of the things that I enjoyed most was going into these places and learning some fashion tips from the marvelously dressed employees. But at the firms, their ties, their suits, their cufflinks, their shoes, just everything. I was constantly in awe. But even the access to the offices and the corporate life, going in and exploring an office, becoming acquainted with big London buildings like the Walkie Talkie or the Shard, or even just getting used to the tea and coffee provisions and how I had to pour myself a cup of tea. It was all new to me, but now I don't get intimidated or overwhelmed by those offices or by those situations, because actually I've been there and done that. And it's something that was an experience which was so priceless. But secondly, and it sort of links in, which it was more the normalization process, where actually everything slowly became more and more normal for me. And it instilled a sense of resilience. And people have sort of, they've listened to me, they've accepted me. And I started to realize that actually my story was my story, and it was unbelievably powerful. I am who I am. So I should own it. I should be proud of it. And the resilience training which SMBP give, where every single one of the students on the scheme spends a day at a professional sports club and learns about resilience, it promoted exactly that. So from that day onwards, I never backed away or was shy of telling my story. So long story short, it changed my life.
Oh, that's incredible to hear. Thank you for sharing, Mohammed. Right, the next question's for Barry Murphy, and it's asked by Marcus Simmons. So how are you approaching the current remote working environment with regard to social mobility? Aside from digital access, housing, for example, is a real issue here.
Wow, that's a massive question in itself. So thank you for raising it. And when you say how are we approaching it, I suppose with regard to ESMA and some of the people we collaborate with, you've got campaigns like Future.now and Device.now, which were addressing access, not only in terms of a huge amount of people at home, particularly school issues where there is no laptop or other provision in the houses. How do we deal with that? And how do we borrow responses we've seen work in other countries? Issues about access to Wi-Fi, looking for more zero-rated sites, that's part of it. But also looking for physical spaces that people can actually do what they need to do in, be it school or work, because that's not always possible in people's current home environment. You know, I was struck by what Mohammed said there is, can't start to fix a problem unless we start to see the world through other people's eyes enough. And this COVID crisis and remote working is starting to get us to all understand more about that. And one of the biggest things that most of the employers I'm talking to have put a lot more attention on, maybe they should have had it before, Cain, is mental well-being and that mental resilience piece, you know, the sense of isolation. And if we're talking about social mobility and entrenched disadvantage, boy, if I felt isolated and disadvantaged before, my world has got even more closed in this virtual space. So we're looking to work with councils, with employers and others and schools to look at how we stop missing a generation. It's a hackney phrase, I know at the moment, but it kind of captures it. We could miss a generation and we've got to join up to stop that happening. I hope that went some way towards answering the question, which probably would require a panel of its own for a day.
Yeah, that was brilliant. Thanks, Barry, for that insight. We can set up another panel just for you for that question, if you like.
On my own.
Okay, the next question's for you, Sam. As a tech expert, what role do you think technology and your peers can play in making the UK and the world a fairer, better and more sustainable place?
It really comes down to the reach and the impact that a digital tool or software can aid. So we can help messages spread faster. We can help more complex messages spread with higher fidelity presentation of information. And those are really the things that, you know, like the digital tool isn't going to solve the problem. There's still going to be a lot of human work to be done, but it can certainly get information to the right place and the right messages in the right place at the right time and to more places at a lower cost.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, another question for you, Professor Kanter. Do the coalitions that really work all have a key driving figure for people to form around? So the Oceans example that you gave had a key figurehead. Is that key?
Yes, thank you for that question and insight and observation. Not necessarily one, it might be two or three. But yes, because there needs to be a driving force. Now, that driving force, the so-called charismatic leader, is important to keep embodying the purpose and to continue to persist and continue to hold the coalition together. But I think one of the keys to sustaining an innovation is to share that role with many other people, is to begin to divide into areas and have people who are the driving force in those areas. And sometimes there are people who might be the successor to that leader. But yes, these are social movements. You have to think of them as social movements who do need charismatic leaders embodying the purpose. And, you know, Max Weber once said, the great sociologist long time ago, that every charismatic leader gave way to an administrator and an agitator. That is, you needed a chief operating officer, and you also needed somebody who kept the message going and kept whipping up people's enthusiasm to continue to belong. I've been working recently on a case, not in my book, Think Outside the Building, but I hope you'll read the stories that are in my book, but a case on a coalition in Chicago, a very elaborate, complex coalition dedicated to ending inequality, working on racial justice, ending the death gap, which is the longevity issues and the health and wealth issues. And one of the issues they're facing just a couple of years into it, even though people love this, first of all, the work is harder than anybody thought, and there are stumbles along the way, things that have to be redirected, but also the initial coalition was represented. So 6 hospitals were at the core, plus many banks and community residents and so forth. But the people who had those institutions turn over. And so while the hospital may have been committed, the bank may have been committed, what did that mean exactly? It meant some individuals who championed it, and they have to be replaced. So you have to find other people within your partner organization. So you do have to have that charismatic force to keep selling and have it embodied by one person. You know, that person may not have a big ego, may not want to be known as the face of the organization, but yet that really does matter. You don't have to be an autocrat, but you do have to be a symbol.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm going to have to up my game as the charismatic face of Mission Beyond, aren't I? We've got another question for you.
I can give you tips.
Oh, yeah.
I have a whole chapter on telling the right story. How we tell stories to engage people. Anyway, sorry, go on.
We've got another question for you actually, Professor Kanter. You alluded to it. It's from Harriet Green, who's the ex-CEO of IBM Asia Pacific, and she says, can you comment on the combinational force of vision and dreaming with operational brilliance to avoid the worst excesses of very messy middles?
Oh, thank you, Harriet, and how nice to hear from you. Well, yes, you do need that combination. You do need operational excellence, because if it doesn't work, you can assemble people, you can have noble goals, but then it has to work in practice. And so you want to make sure that your first iteration, first of all, your first proof of concept, it's very important that it all works, but it's easy to write it off because, oh, well, maybe that was unique. It's the second replication that really matters, and you can't replicate exactly the way you did it the first time. You have to be flexible enough to modify it for the circumstances, whether that's a different city, a different school, a different employer, a different country. So operational excellence, absolutely important, but you can't let operational excellence drive everything. That is, you can't give it over to the technocrats. Excuse me, Sam, I know you're not a technocrat. I know that we need people who understand the importance of the mission and are driven to make sure that every demonstration has in it the seeds of what the mission is. The other important principle I use is build in to your first iteration everything you'd like to be eventually. For example, if you'd like a lot of diversity, you build it in from the beginning. You can't say, well, we'll try it, and then later on we'll reach out to diverse people. And similarly with operational excellence, you begin building the systems for replication right in the beginning. You start documenting everything and reviewing it and seeing how it can be improved. So I think that's a perfect combination, but the operational excellence comes a little later, I think, if you don't have the charismatic leadership to inspire and entice, you can't even get off the ground. Thank you, Harriet.
Thank you, Professor Kanter. The next question is from Claire Wardle, and I'm going to ask you, Barry Mathews. There are many initiatives in this space, and I'm presuming this space means social mobility in this context. How do we join them up?
You're gonna have to unmute me again, Mara, if you're yep.
We can hear you. Yeah.
How do we join them up? Well, ESMA, that's how we join them up, because ESMA is not an initiative. It's been set up for one purpose alone, is to stop those initiatives being passing ships in the night. So, as I said, our first phase is to enable people to get their hands around the issue of low income from cradle to grave, or from cradle through to retirement. And from that point on, people can then identify their passion for the particular issue, whichever life stage they want to focus on. And then, armed with that knowledge and that passion, look to see what's already happening. And so the phase 2 operational map, which Sam alluded to, the call to arms for all of you developers are on the call. We need help to build that. We've got an architecture in terms of the co-op have done something around well-being, which they're happy to white label license it, but we need to augment that to enable us to map the social mobility initiatives that we're working on. And we've already done a proof of concept. So the gathering of the information, the assessment of the information has already been done to iron out any wrinkles, but we need a team of developers to help with that. So that phase 2 will be an interactive map of the UK. You can zone in on your part of the country. You can see which initiatives are working together, whether that be state, third sector and business. There will be embedded into those summaries recommendations, so an operational assessment on how things can be better. And from that, we're looking therefore to present very easy answers for those initiatives to starting working more collaboratively, more efficiently. I think the easiest way I could describe it, think about social mobility as a PLC or a FTSE 5 or a Fortune 500 company. Think about it having 5 divisions. The first division being early years, the final division being progression through work. And think about individuals being the product which that organization sells. And that product moves through each division in terms of its life cycle, in terms of generation of revenue. What we're trying to do in each division is identify how the 3 teams that make up that division, state, business and third sector, can work more efficiently. And that's what the drive is, to map an operational review. And then that got icing on the cake that I mentioned earlier, is to then identify the best of and say, right, here's a license fee. We'll commercially remunerate you for your effort and your intellectual property, but we'll take that for that commercially justifiable fee, and we will then make that available to others like you on a free Creative Commons basis. So that there'll be a cross-fertilization of best practice. So we're taking all the best bits of business and applying it to the social issue. And so there's 2 things in there: development in terms of that mapping tool, and the call to arms to be the individual researchers, because this isn't just about grafting data from websites. It's about grey matter analysis of what could work better at a local level, at a regional level, and at a national level.
May I add something?
Sure, absolutely.
Oh, thank you, because I think that sounds fantastic. And taking those best practices and being so systematic about it, that sounds fantastic. So the one thing I want to add is relationships. People respond to people. And so one of the reasons you get lots of organizations on your side is that people feel known and included. The same thing we want for the students we're trying to help, is that people feel known, their identity is clear, they feel valued and honored, and credit is shared. The Chicago huge complex coalition, so many things can go wrong, that if people feel it's owned by somebody else and they could drop out and no one would care, it doesn't matter. This idea of always sharing the credit and working on the people side and the relation side. That's all I would add, because you've got a fabulous process.
Yeah, well, that's really key, Rosabeth. And I think that's the thing about ESMA. It's a coalition of individuals. You don't have to be an organization to join it. You can be an individual and put your hat into the ring. And equally, those groups that are going to, there'll be study groups that will take early years, and they will be the people who own that analysis and present it to a panel. We've managed to get the great and the good from third sector, business and state to come and listen to these presentations and then make the recommendations and apply the incubator fund. But those individuals who are actually doing the work will get the credit for the work. Absolutely. This is look, we're literally, your book is our manifesto. It's amazing.
Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you both. Just relating to that then, we've also got a question again for you, Professor Kanter, from Natalie Wharton, you know, on the subject of people and relationships. What have you seen work with energizing and motivating people in the middle of a project? And I think she's highlighted middle, so it's kind of alluding to the messy middle there.
Yeah, well, you know, yeah, middles definitely are miserable. So first you have to look into yourself. Are you still motivated? You have to make sure that you can carry the dream and the passion forward. Because if you look tired, if your spirits are sagging, if you would rather move on to something else, it's going to be hard to energize anybody else. The second is, I'm a big believer in the power of convening, of the energy of everybody seeing everybody else. Zoom actually makes it possible to see all those Zoom screens. I mean, I wish I had been able to see the faces of the 120 or so people on Zoom now. It is fantastic to have people share their stories and feel the connection and the mutual energy, the mutual spirit. We don't energize ourselves, we do that through one another. Then third one is the ability to rethink certain premises and engage people in that rethinking. During the pandemic, getting people over the hump involves a lot of operational fixes, doing things differently in your company or your organization. And that involves asking the people at the grassroots, what do they think could be done differently or better? And nothing energizes people like being asked, being involved, having a chance to participate. And so that's another thing, engage people in that repair work that you have to do in order to be ready for the future. And then constantly keep the vision in front of people. It's not just understood, you say it again and again and again, and then you thank people profusely. The one thing managers often forget to do is say thank you. And you just say it as often as possible through as many forums as possible.
Fantastic, thank you. There's been so many good questions that the answers are definitely going to feed into how we evolve the operating model of Mission Beyond itself. We've got 3 minutes. I'm just going to wrap up now. I think that's all of the questions, all of the time that we've got available for the questions. Thank you to everyone for your time today, and thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you, Professor Kanter. Thank you, Barry, for sharing your personal stories. It's been brilliant. I hope the community, I hope you've all been inspired, learned something new, and have seen that we do have the tools and skills to make a difference together. And we would love for more of you to be involved, and we'll be in touch to set up the next stage of conversations. We'll also send out an email with all of the content from today, and we'll invite you to be a part of this growing community. I think we had about 120 attendees today and a similar number in the previous one, so that we validated that lots of people want to be involved. And as I said previously, you know, if you want to receive a copy of this brilliant book, when you log off of Zoom, you'll be presented with a survey. If you fill that out and fill in the address field, you will have this book arrive in the post. So thank you everyone for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you all.